Train hard, recover faster, and bring on the gains with Recovery Systems. And your host, Coach Mike on the mic.
What I'm going to give you today is some real life case studies and findings on how to use. So here it is. It's clinically validated by Harvard Medical School. We've got one of them in operation now, sitting on a quadricep over here. It's eminently affordable, and if you look at $295 US plus some tax into Singapore, if you compare that with say a Garmin Fenix 5 at $1,100, the value of that data, I would argue, is far more valuable than that price. I'm not going to increase the price, by the way. But I'm just saying I think it's highly valuable data in the hands of people that know how to use it. Okay, so what is muscle oxygen? It's measuring the difference. Basically, I'm going to just summarize this as the difference between oxygen available and oxygen used. Now, the way that the Humon works is that it's beaming near-infrared light into the muscle. It's beaming it into the adipose layer of the muscle. That's why we wouldn't put it on an elbow, because it's not going to read. It needs to go into the quadricep, into the fleshy part of the muscle. And it's picking up oxygenation levels via an algorithm, the magic's in the software, because oxygenated blood looks different to deoxygenated blood. Fair comment? That's where the magic is, by the way. It pairs with the phone, it actually calibrates to the person. So in other words, if Jessie handed me hers, it would calibrate to me. And then if I pass it on, it would calibrate to the next person.
How long does it take to calibrate?
Oh, less than probably 10 seconds, I would say, sometimes quicker. It's very quick. So it'll pick up the Bluetooth either on your phone or your Garmin device or your Apple Watch, and there's more devices being added as you go. It'll pair to both the phone and the watch, by the way. So the reason why it's great on the watch is that, here's an example of it on the phone. The reason why it's great on the watch is that you can see real time what's going on. So you may not always be able to see your phone, it may be tucked away in a pocket. The numbers are then color-coded, so if the number appears in a green color, that means steady state oxygen present. If it goes into the orange, you're approaching your limit. In other words, you're moving into your threshold. If it's in the red, then you're approaching your limit. This would line up with your VO2 max numbers, and then blue is recovery. All right, so it will talk to a number of different devices and different phone, Android, iOS, different models, Garmin. Now I would say this quite up front, the Garmin Fenix 5 has some Bluetooth issues. It's not a Humon thing, but it does have some foibles, and Garmin admit that on their site, so they're trying to rectify that. So that's the only instance that I've seen of sometimes people having dropouts and so on. Otherwise, and that's not relating to the Humon. Okay, and the key thing we're trying to do is, one, pace yourself, minimize injury by having correct warm up and recovery, and also track progress. Okay, so let's take a look at warming up, and here's an example of both a good and a bad warm up. Whoops. All right. Okay, this is a fairly good warm up. I've got some other examples later, and in this session, the maximum muscle oxygen actually increased to, I see, it's down the bottom there, to 73%. Before they got into the working set. So if you compare that to this, where this would be a situation where perhaps somebody hurried to the gym or hurried to practice, didn't warm up properly, and they actually compromised what happened during the set, because the muscle oxygen never really hit the numbers that it would have if they had warmed up properly. By the way, how long do you think it takes you to warm up?
depends.
20 minutes.
Longer than
How long?
20.
20?
I would
Jesse?
guess.
Longer than I originally thought.
Me too. So what's the number? What's the number for you?
So it's interesting. I used it during the Spartan race in the UK just to actually get a good warm up, and I would say it took 25 minutes, half an hour
Okay.
for me to feel like I made good progress with that.
Personally for me it's 30 minutes. Normal situation warm up. Even here in Southeast Asia, when you think it's hey, it's warm outside, really your capillaries haven't opened for business properly, it's at least 20 or 30 minutes. So yes.
That number doesn't depend on the environment?
Yes, it does. Cooler weather will be longer. Now I've got a biohack for you for warm up later. All right, so working out the Humon. So this is a threshold test. This is on a treadmill and increasing by half a K per minute until exhaustion. So you can see the person has started off, in this case the person warmed up, I know from the protocol beforehand, and steadily they're still in the green zone all the way through until they hit their threshold. Now at that point, this is zone 2 to 3 crossover. It will capture the heart rate as well, so we know what that was. But remember, if we're capturing heart rate, if you're doing this on a treadmill inside, your heart rate's going to be different, right? This is why heart rate's not something you should be, it is a number you should look at, but you shouldn't pay too much credibility, because if you're doing this outside, that heart rate may be actually higher for the same sort of effort. And then going into the threshold and then into VO2 max until exhaustion. So we can actually upload this. So that's pretty straightforward and simple. But if you're...
Just a question. You know that you're good to go when you have hit the plateau?
Yes. Now after a while you'll know what your working range for your oxygen is, for your muscle oxygen, what your typical working range is. Off the bat it'll take you, a few weeks of data until you actually realise what it is. In fact, one thing that some of my athletes have also been doing is playing around with nitrates, like beetroot juice and so on, to try and boost their oxygen level. So how would you go about measuring that? Here it is here. It'll appear in those numbers. Pretty cool, huh? So that in itself is pretty valuable data, particularly if you're matching it with your with various things, your pace, your heart rate, and so on. But you can actually upload this. Take a look at this. Anyone using Training Peaks in the room?
Just signed up.
Did you? Or at Today's Plan or any of those platforms. So this is a scatter file. And so this is only for the data geeks. Now for Scott and I, we've always coached a little differently than going this far. But somebody like Nick, who's very data driven, would that be fair to say? He's getting all shy now. But take a look at this. Look at the tipping point of the anaerobic, and then a very steep tipping point down to exhaustion. And these numbers actually correlate to zone 3, zone 4, 287 watts because this person had a stride power meter on their shoe. At 151 BPM, okay, that's environmental. Indoors, outdoors, it's going to be different. And a pace. Pretty cool, eh? So previously, to get that sort of data, you need to go to a lab, have your finger pricked. Possibly if you're going to exhaustion, it'll involve a mask to measure your gas output as well. This is real time. So in other words, you go out and do this again tomorrow, whereas the lab is indoors typically, you will get a moment in time reading on what's going on. This will give you a day-to-day reading on what's going on. Did you have a quick tiny variance? Okay, case studies. I put these two up. These are real life, these are cycling for the cyclists in the room. But this could apply to running as this is an athlete that is very fit, and they're training at the upper end of their steady zone, the upper end of the endurance zone, tipping into their threshold. So this would be optimal training from a strength endurance point of view. Quick snapshot on a graph. I've got it behind me here. Here's the formula for endurance training. And we're going to do a talk if Joe invites us back, if we're not thrown out, and Joe invites us back. We're going to do a talk, and I'm going to ask Scott to help me on this talk on training training tips for training and recovery tips for endurance athletes. So this is the 87-9-4 formula. What do you think 87% of the time you should be?
Long and slow.
Nick's been fully indoctrinated in this. It should be strength endurance and right on the edge as you get fitter, because for a really unfit person, they should be probably walking, starting off walking, right? Brisk walking. Get their fat burning, their fuel efficiency up, and until they reach a certain level of fitness. And then when you're going up for your steady rides or your runs, you should be, that's what your Humon data should look like, something like that. Okay, the 9%'s the orange, the 4%'s the red, VO2 max threshold. Not necessarily in one day, by the way, because that's where training blocks come into it, because it's not a workout of the day. So Scott and I took a number of athletes from, I would say, to be fair, average athletes to world champ qualifiers. We applied that formula. It's not rocket science, although we'll claim full credit, won't we?
Yeah, why not?
But now we have this device to actually keep an eye on things. The second one's a really good one. Can I have, so what about that as a warm-up? Pretty good, huh? All right. This is Mount Faber repeats.
Yeah. Which side?
This is from, first one's on the steep side,
Okay.
and the rest are from the 7-11 up.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know, Mount Faber's 120 metres above sea level, of which you've got about 80 metres of climbing. It doesn't really count, right? Not by Tour de France standards. A mountain, a proper hill climb, something with snow on the top. Fair enough?
Yeah.
But here we are. So what I really like about this athlete's training program had a good warm-up, had threshold with some VO2 blasts, so it was like 3 minutes on threshold and then 15 seconds on VO2, then back off to threshold, then 15 seconds. So this is a fairly advanced session of an athlete getting ready for a race.
And he was aiming for some watts, or like 300 watts?
Doesn't matter,
Okay.
because this is your physiological power meter right here.
Okay.
But I will tell you, because I've got a graph to show you, that the threshold corresponds to this guy's FTP.
Okay.
Boom. So you don't need to buy the $1,500 power meter, you just buy the $400 Humon. Unless you want a power meter as well. Unless you got so much money. Anyway, because I've got everything. As a coach, over the years, I've invested in trying to understand the gadgets, the gizmos. I've got a cupboard full of them. Would you like to buy some? Because I don't use many of them anymore. They've been replaced, superseded. All right. What about this? Any comments on this, folks? Because this is what would appear on your phone as a summary, or on the Humon web, or this would upload into Garmin Connect or into Training Peaks as a scatter file. But I think as athletes, I think simple is better. I ask when my athlete sends me, when I've set them a program and they send me the file, they send me the graph, I go, what did I ask you to do? Yes, that you nailed it. Great. Or if they're all over the place, then okay, let's talk about what happened. This is an athlete that went out and rode with a group that were far too fast for him. This person's unfit, and they got thrashed. That's why the muscle oxygen's all over the place. They clearly would be much better off slowing it down and not riding with that group, quite frankly. So we've, as an experience as coaches, we've taken those people out of those groups, and then 12 weeks later they've ridden by themselves under a program of riding much slower. Then they've gone back into that group and they've been the strongest, or one of the strongest in that group, because their whole fuel efficiency, their capillary network's been built up, their pulmonary stroke's been built up. So this is a great way of validating what that looks like. Okay, the one on the right is another pretty good session. So lovely warm-up, some shorter threshold sessions, and right at the end there's a nuclear disaster. But this was intentional. That's a big VO2 session. Can you see how long it took the recovery? See the muscle oxygen actually dips? See that line trending down? That's the available oxygen. This is a sign of fatigue. So this person very wisely called it quits at that point, because there's nothing more to gain. In fact, you're probably going into negative benefit because you're overreaching. You know, overreaching can actually be worse, not better. I'll go back one slide, and you can see how this declines, that Mount Faber. So is it worth doing another one? Probably not. Yeah, your body's going to respond to that. Maybe if you do another couple, you've got too much cortisol floating around, you just hammer yourself, take too long to recover, even with this great equipment down here, but you're overreaching. So this is stopping you from overreaching by understanding how to interpret the data. Any questions on either of those? See, one of the things I committed to do as a distributor, when people buy this, I realise that a lot of people don't know how to train. I don't say I'm the answer, by the way. But what I do is, if they want to voluntarily sign up to a WhatsApp group, I will try and interpret their data. But because I don't know what they're training for, because they're not being coached by me, I'll ask them one question. What did you want to achieve? The biggest problem I have with that group is everyone tries to copy Jesse.
No, they don't. They say they will, and then no one ever does it.
Everyone. So Jesse's profile is that of a very fit athlete and an athlete that has a very rare ability to push beyond what most people could. So I tell people, do not copy Jesse, unless
with a health warning.
Unless you've got a good coach like Sean. Is that fair enough, Sean? Yeah. All right. Okay. So it also applies to power sports, lifting, or anything less than 2 minutes. So now the setting on the Humon has two settings. One is endurance, that's anything over 2 minutes. One is under 2 minutes. We're going to hear about that with some of Jesse's sessions a little later on. Here's a situation of maximal lifting, and what I really like about this is the athlete, let's say theoretically it's this guy, is not doing his next set until he's fully recovered. So it's gone green, then into the blue, so he's waited until he's fully recovered. If the guys down the front here on the recovery system starting to yawn a little bit, it's hopefully not because of me, but it's their parasympathetic system kicking in because of the recovery system. It's triggering your body's healing response, and that's putting you into rest and in an advanced state where the good stuff's happening with the bad stuff going out, the good stuff coming back in. So more about that later if we have time.
So it gives you like a personalized resting time, right?
Yes,
During your workout.
because as coaches we would arbitrarily say to athletes,
1 minute.
exactly, and we don't know what's going on. Do you know, I know what my working range is on my for a training session. If I go out and do a mechanical warm-up, say on the bike, if my oxygen levels don't come up into my working range, then I cancel what it was I intended to do if that was going to be something intense, because my body's saying no. And this isn't just my mind, because sometimes my mind's saying no, right? But that my the oxygen levels are up nice, and I know that my body's ready to go. But if they're not, and for me that's mid-60s to maybe 70, that's my working range. If they're not getting up much above 60, not going to do it. And that's smart, because I could be heading for an injury or overreaching, or I haven't recovered from whatever it was, including sleep or drinking too much wine with Scott, which happens occasionally. So now the has-been will stop, and I will invite the real athlete current to come up. And Jesse, a round of applause, if you don't mind.
I think I have a good enough teacher voice. Is there anyone that can't hear me without the mic? Oh, fine.
Oh yes, because we are recording this for posterity. Jesse, introduce yourself. I mean, is it self-explanatory?
I mean, I will say you can't use that code anymore because the race has been. But yeah, I'm Jessie Montague. So I only really got into fitness 2 or 3 years ago, would you say?
Properly?
Yeah.
1.5.
So Sean is lucky. Sean gets to be my coach and my husband, which he really enjoys doing neither. But within the last 2 years, I've started getting into obstacle course and Spartan racing. So I did a year as running in age groups, and then in January this year I moved to racing elite, which was really exciting. It went a little bit better than I expected it to, so that was fun. And I'm at the point now where I'm just kind of using different things, using the Humon, using the recovery systems to... I used to think that working harder was better, and that the harder you worked, the better results you would have, and I quite quickly got very injured.
Yeah. You're using some protein-based, plant-based protein as well?
I do, yeah, I moved away from whey protein, so I actually love the Nuzes range. Yeah, so it's all about kind of finding the balance between training hard but recovering hard as well. So.
Yep, okay. Tell us.
Okay, so yeah, so the one on the left...
Would you like the pointer?
Sure.
I'm sure you know how to...
I actually... There we go. This one here was actually training. So I did do a vertical marathon. I decided that there was a vertical marathon on my birthday, so what better thing to do on your birthday than 43 flights of stairs? This is actually a training session for it. So, oh no, have you pulled the different data? Is this the actual marathon?
This one's I think this is the actual.
Okay, so sorry, this is the actual marathon. So I had a really long warm-up. It actually took them longer than we thought to kind of get out of the pen. So I did a bit of running around, I did a bit of kind of just warming up, and then obviously when you start running up 42 flights of stairs and it's a race, you don't really take into account whether or not you should be coming out of the red zone. So I basically instantly fell into intense, and just tried to keep that going as long as I could. This little part here is when I got to the top of the stairs and had a little lie down for a while.
What was the first, after the red, what was the first green patch? Was
the
that
first
a roadblock
green? So I think coming up to, so because they send you off in waves, I had kind of 20 sets or stairs also on my own, and then I started to hit other people that I had to overtake. Yeah, so I assume that's me kind of coming up to people slightly getting in my way. And yeah, I had a little lay down on the floor for a while, and then I eventually got the lift back down. But I wasn't in this sense using the Humon to its best, because I was terribly ignoring everything it was saying and pushing through anyway.
This is screaming meltdown.
Yeah.
Just as a quick aside, I've actually got some cardiac patients using, so some folks that have had heart attacks using this in order to stay out of the red.
Oh, interesting.
So they're cyclists, and so they're, rather than heart rate, well, they are looking at their heart rate as well, they're using it to stay out of the red, because it's going to stress them too much. But, yeah, I have no issues here though, the looks of it.
No, it was good.
All right.
Whereas this was actually a workout where I was using the data to inform, and this was a workout at Ministry of Fitness. So Sean offers weekly kind of boot camps down there, Spartan specific boot camps. So it was kind of like a every minute on the minute type thing to start off with, like lots of rounds and sets and things like that. And then, so you can see I'm kind of recovering in between. It was, I think you'd given us like 20 rounds to do. So I was kind of keeping an eye, it does sound like you, keeping an eye on my heart rate and just giving myself a few bits of time to recover. And then we ended with, this is a 5-minute burpee test, which proceed with caution. And kind of save that to the end, because I knew once I'd done that it was game over. So again, this was me lying on the floor recovering from that.
You bounce back quite quickly after 5 minutes of burpees, and just as a comment, not many people can recover that quick, and which is another reason why I ask people not to copy Jesse's training sets.
There was a whole class of us that day. Blame him.
Yeah, no one can recover that.
And then, so this one I think is the most interesting for me. You were talking about knowing when your rest time is enough. The track session was new to me about 6 months ago. So I've only really started running in the last year and a half, and coach programs and some horrible speed workouts. That was the thing, is when you start Spartan racing, all the fun stuff is the heavy carries, well for me, and the monkey bars and the stuff, and then I just have to run to get to the next obstacle, and I found that I wasn't quite fast enough, so in came the track sessions. But yeah, so kind of, this was when I was still learning about how to optimize warm-up, so it's not the best, but I tend to start quite high in Singapore in oxygen levels anyway, so kind of brought it up to here. And then what I'd been doing before is Sean had given me a 400 meter repeat and then a set time to recover, and I'd just kind of sit and stand and look at my watch or have a little cry, and when the time was up I'd run again, and actually what's been really helpful with the Humon is that that's now not necessarily the same amount of time. I wait until I'm back in the blue and then I'll go again, which is good because sometimes it's less than the time that I've been given, so then I have to run quicker, which is sad, but it's all part of the process. And it's nice to have this data. When you talk about heart rate, I've just come back, I've been in the UK for 5 weeks, and my heart rate is all over the place at the minute. So I'm going out for a run outside and have no idea of how to track anything because my heart is claiming that I'm at threshold, and I know I'm not. It's just because of the humidity that I've got unused to. Yep. So having kind of that muscle oxygen, right, you're ready to go again, has been really helpful. I'm not sure what I was up to there. Oh, this is Bukatima Hill.
Yes. Were they hill repeats?
They were hill repeats. That was mean.
How many minutes were the climbs?
So it's Bukatima Hill. I think this was quite a long session. I'm training for an ultra at the minute, so some of my sessions are getting a bit longer. I would say that it's a 2 or 3 minute climb, and then I walk back down.
About 6 up.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, I'm obviously faster than you. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any questions. I think they're the only ones that I've got. But I'm still learning how to use it, but there is so much that you can take from it. And I would say if you go onto your computer and look at it, you get a lot more data than you'd get on the app.
Yeah, the web app's a lot more detailed. So I would say, just picking up on Jesse's point on running in the humidity, and because your body cools through evaporation, right? When the sweat's sitting on you, it's not evaporating. So therefore your body has to increase the heart rate in order to push the blood around to try and cool you down. So there's quite an overhead training here outside because of that, particularly if you're a bigger surface area person. Smaller people seem to have a slightly better time of it. The opposite happens in the cold. The bigger people have a better time of it, and the smaller people tend to suffer. However, so that's why heart rate is quite variable. And as Jessie pointed out, she was calling her heart rate monitor a liar because she knew what the actual situation was.
Can you, sorry, question, about the tracks? What was the goal of the training at this moment?
So I was doing...
We talk about oxygen, and recovering, and you wait at this moment, then the blue phase came out and you restart, but what was the main goal of your training?
So 400 meter repeats.
Yeah.
So I was...
Which zone did you try to target? What did you try to do?
So for me it's to hit a certain time, so I'm trying to get that time down, but just seeing how it goes. This is very much still in me kind of playing around with it, but it was just to see the difference in...
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in?
So looking at the data, these were the 400s, correct? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then the 200s. Looking at the data, so she's gone into the red in the third one, probably pushing a little bit harder. She didn't go into the red on the 200s because it's too quick to go completely anaerobic, and she has a very high threshold from what I've observed in your data. So you can see how the muscle oxygen has declined. There's probably time to call it quits there on the 400s and then move. A nice recovery there, and then moving into the 200s, which she could sustain quite probably around double the amount and get the quality out of it. Leg speed, training the legs to go faster. But what I've seen with your training as an observation is that you've started to really embrace the whole long, slow distance.
Yeah. Well, I've got a 50k coming up, so that's the key at the minute.
But ultimately, I think that's going to hold you in really good stead. So for Jessie, or for an athlete like Jessie, I would have them training at the upper end of their steady zone. So do I have a secret one tucked in there? Okay.
Oh.
Power meters.
Am I done?
No.
All right, Humon data. This is into a scatter file into Training Peaks. Personally, I never go in here. I think it's not necessary. And this is functional threshold. So this channel is the Humon data. This is the power data. So you can see that the power peaks almost correspond to the threshold. The peaks pretty much line up. So I would argue that you don't need the power meter. Post-workout analysis, so we just talked about that with Jesse. So those of you that are using Training Peaks, this will suck the data into a scatter file. Okay, I want to talk about recovering using the Humon. To recover, including what we do and how it validates it. Have you undone yourself there?
Yeah, it's done.
It's cooked. All right. So, biohacking your warm-up and your recovery. Sorry, I blocked that out. This guy's Thomas Thrall. Do you know Thomas? Kind of. Yeah.
You won the race, right?
No, you got second. You got second. I captured it from a commentary point of view. I captured the key moment where he got beaten up by the guy that won it. A beautiful attack, right at the right time. So this is Thomas doing recovery. Now, his muscle oxygen increased by 32%. He'd done a 160k ride that morning. His muscle oxygen increased by 32% in a 30-minute recovery session. What I want you to notice, and can you see this curve here? This is the increase. The highs and lows are the squeeze and the release of the cuff. Can you notice that the first, you can't quite see this, but that's the 8-minute mark there. Can you see that most of it happened in the first 8 minutes? What do you think the biohack for a warm-up is? Do you remember how long we said it is to warm up? 20, 30 minutes? There it is in 8 minutes. And actually, all the data I've seen is that by doing 10 minutes or less, let's call it 10 minutes, on this, your muscle oxygen will be above your working range. So if your working range is 65, it'll be into the 70s. So by the time you go out the door, you still need to do the biomechanical stuff, but your vascular system is primed. So this is a discussion we had with Singapore Rugby and their sevens team. You got guys sitting on the bench, expecting to come on in the last 3 minutes of the game and perform. Not going to happen. They still need to do, so they've got a couple of our portable, you notice this one's battery. They've got the battery version so they can have it on the side of the field. And the guys that are on the bench are sitting on this. They're swapping it, 5 minutes each, and keeping themselves ready. They still need to do the butting of horns. Rugby players go and smash each other before they go on the field. They still need to do that, but this is a biohack for their warm-up as well, because they need everything firing by the time they get onto the field. Okay, that's my